All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'll pray for us. Father, I pray that you help us today as we continue to look at difficult passages in biblical theology. Some passages, Lord, are just so beautiful when they begin to connect with other passages of Scripture, and we're drawn to the beauty of the meta-narrative and to the glory of your revelation. And other times we're baffled and we don't understand. And I pray that you would give us confidence in the occasions where we're still looking, that there is a beautiful answer out there, and that it's the right answer, and it's the answer that will make your word look glorious and you look glorious. I pray that we would never rest until we find those kinds of answers. As we continue today with our search, I pray that you help me as a teacher to demonstrate well the tools that we should use, and I pray that in all of it, you would use this class as a means of grace for us to love your word and to love you and to love other people. And we pray all this in Christ's name. Amen. So do please take attendance quiz 17 if you're able to do that. We're finishing up today the whole thing in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and the key difficult passage we've been looking at is 2 Corinthians 2, 1 and 2, now concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, concerning the parousia, and of our being gathered together to him. We ask, brothers, that you not quickly be shaken in mind or alarmed, either by a spirit or a spoken word or a letter seeming to be from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and then the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself over every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. And so we're coming to this text, and we're wanting to know what in the world does this mean? What is the parousia of Jesus? Is there more than one parousia of Jesus? How do we understand this passage? And we've looked at some of the suggestions that there may be a connection between this passage and perhaps Titus. This is from the Arch of Titus in the Roman Forum, kind of tiny little thing. You can walk up to it. You can walk underneath it. There's just a little fence between you and the stone there. But like I remember standing underneath it and looking at this picture, and you can see that these are people carrying the spoils of war in triumph in Rome, celebrating Titus's destruction of the temple. It looks to me that this is actually part of the Ark of the Covenant. They didn't think it was very important because the Ark of the Covenant is made out of thorn wood covered over with gold, so it's just gold plated. This is 75 pounds of pure gold, so that's why they put it in the middle. To them, that was the most valuable thing. But it raises the question, is what Paul's talking about in any way connected with God's judgment on apostate Jerusalem in 70 AD? And last time we looked at two passages in Josephus. One that says Titus went into the holy place of the temple. And of course, no one was supposed to go into the holy place of the temple except the high priest. And our passage did talk about the man of lawlessness going into the temple of God. So it's certainly possible that there's some connection here. And Josephus also makes a cryptic reference to Titus and his army outside the temple, that they brought their ensigns in, and remember their eagles on top of those ensigns. They set them over against the eastern gate, and they offered sacrifices to them. And the next step in my research, I'm exploring this idea, is this pig sacrifice. I saw one scholar suggest that the sacrifices that were being talked about would be the sacrifice of a pig. And I know from Daniel that Antiochus Epiphanes sacrificed a pig in the temple. And so I'm a little just intrigued. Is Josephus telling me that Titus and his leader sacrificed a pig outside the temple? Two references in Josephus, they seem fairly important, perhaps. This is a statue of Titus in the Louvre. This is probably what he actually looked like. You can see that he served as emperor for 3 years, and he died as a young man when he was 41. His father, Vespasian, was emperor for 10 years, and he actually became emperor while he was besieging Jerusalem, and left Titus in control and went to Rome to become emperor. And so the question is, does 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians have anything to do with that? Is it just kind of a interesting observation, or is what Paul's talking about in any way connected with a coming in judgment in 70 AD? So what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at the man of lawlessness. We're going to look at the cross references, and I kind of chide myself that we didn't do that first, because I think that's what you should always do first. Whenever you come to any difficult passage, the first thing you want to do is look up the cross references. The best commentary on the Bible is the Bible. And so if you look up the cross references, then you want to do a history of interpretation. What have other good people said about this passage in the past? You want to make a document and start organizing your notes. And you want to be what I call an ad fontes person. This is the advice C.S. Lewis gave to all his literature students. I make all my students read that little 6-page essay. It's part of the introduction to Athanasius' On the Incarnation. And Lewis talks about ad fontes being like, if somebody says Josephus says blank, don't put in your notes Josephus says blank. Go to Josephus and read the actual quote for yourself. Don't be a secondary scholar, be a primary scholar. Go to the sources. And then what we're going to do in maybe the second half of class today is I just want to take a little while to talk about your research projects and maybe give you some advice, and we'll have different people kind of talk about where they are and what they're doing, and maybe as a class, I can give some advice, maybe as a class we can give advice together. So that's what we're going to do today. So the first thing you want to do is look up the cross-references. And the way to get at the cross-references is get the best Bible, cross-reference Bible you can find, and look up the passages that they're saying are parallel passages to your passage. I've done this for a generation. In the English Bible, probably the New American Standard does the best job on cross-references. ESV is really good. NIV is good. I found that the Nestle Aland text, their cross-references are crazy good. They never send me to like a place that I don't get huge benefit. And even if you don't read Greek, if you can get the just margin, they're going to give you the key passages. And when I go through this, I particularly, anytime I see an Old Testament passage, I for sure am going to look that up. And so this is our passage. Let no one deceive you in any way, that unless the apostasy comes first, and unless the man of lawlessness, the anthropos tes enemias, the son of destruction, unless that guy comes laying against and exalting himself over every so-called God and worship, so that he into the inner nave of God sits down, showing himself as God. Unless that happens, the day of the Lord hasn't happened yet. Now, when I come over here to the cross-references, biblical theological bells start going off, because I'm seeing that Nestle Aland is giving me lots of Old Testament passages. I chide myself that we didn't start here, because when I was doing my history of interpretation, I read about 20 commentaries before the first one ever mentioned that any of this was mentioned in the Old Testament. And I would have been much better off if I'd started here and read these passages first. So, what should we do now is we should look these passages up. Now, I said Nestle Aland is the best. It's the best, but there is a drawback. It's in Latin. So, and it's in abbreviated Latin. So it isn't going to be First Kings. It's going to be First Regnum, or whatever the Latin word, reges, Latin word. And so you kind of have to realize, okay, they're using Latin and German, but the cross references are so good, it's worth working through it. This tells me Isaiah 57:3 and following. That's what the S means, believe it or not. In the Septuagint. They're saying this passage is connected to Isaiah 57:3 and following in the Septuagint. This passage is connected to Psalm 88:23 in the Septuagint. And then they also have the cross-reference John 17:12. And then they have the cross-reference Daniel 11:36. And they're telling me, if you want to understand what this passage is about, these are the places you need to go. So what do we need to do as students? What should we do? We should look them up. So who wants to look up Isaiah 57:3? Who'll look that up and read it for us out loud? Who'll look up Psalm 88:23. And remember that in the Septuagint, the Psalm chapters are one number off. So this is going to be 180, going to be 89 in English, and sometimes it's one number off in verse numbers too. They count their verses and chapters differently than we do. So who'll look up Psalm 89, and it's about verse 23. Who'll look up that? Good. Who'll look up John 17:12 and read it for us? Who'll look up? Good, Nathan. And who'll look up Daniel 11:36? Who'll do that for us? Good. Okay. So let's start with Isaiah 57:3. Who'll read it for us? All right. Yes, absolutely.
But you draw near, son of the sorceress, offspring of the adulterer,
So we're looking for the phrase, the man of anomia, or the son of perdition. And so this passage has sons of lawlessness. So it isn't exactly the same phrase, but it's kind of leaning in that direction. So, Jessica, who is Isaiah 57 as a chapter talking about? So God is calling someone sons of lawlessness. Well, who is that? It looks like it's Israel. The ESV, if you have the paragraph headings, doesn't it say something at 57:1, God's complaint against idolatrous Israel or something like that? This may be referring to Israel. It's not the exact phrase, but it's similar. I'm kind of intrigued. Okay, he'll do 89:23 for us. Good.
The enemy shall not exact upon him, nor the son of wickedness afflict.
Okay, so this is the enemy, him, the son of evil. And notice it says the son of lawlessness. Now, our phrase is the man of lawlessness, the son of destruction. So it isn't exactly the phrase, but it is the word, one of the words that's used there. So in Psalm 89, who is this enemy and who is this son of lawlessness? I'm not sure. It's somebody. And Paul may be alluding to it. Okay, who had 17? Nathan?
While I was with them, I kept reading your name, which you have given me. I have regarded them, and not one of them has been lost except the son of destruction. That the scripture.
So that's 17:3, you said? 12. Okay. Except the son of Apoleia, in order that scripture might be fulfilled. And we're looking for the phrase, the son of Apoleia. That's the exact phrase. Who's the son of Apoleia in 17:12? This is the day before Jesus is crucified. Judas. That's interesting. Who is Paul talking about here? Okay, he'll read Daniel 11:36, and I think probably you want to read 37 as well. He's going to read that. Good.
The king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself, magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god. He shall magnify himself above all.
Who's that talking about? What was it, 11:36? Yeah, so who is that? It's Antiochus Epiphanes, who defiled the temple in 167 BC and sacrificed a pig on the altar. Hanukkah celebrates cleansing the temple and rededicating it to the worship of God. Do you have an observation?
Titus did that in the temple. This kind of language is used to put into the temple, but Paul uses it echoing that past Jewish ideal, reappropriated to Christianity to speak about Titus.
That's causing me to start moving toward Titus as a possibility. I'm still not there, but I'm less concerned than I was, because let's go back and read the passage again, Carlos. Particularly, I think it's the verse after the one that I gave you to read. If you'll read that again. And as you read it, I'm just going to have concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus. Don't be alarmed. Let no one deceive you, for the day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, the man of lawlessness revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or worship. Isn't that being quoted in that passage? But if you'll read it for us again, just
37.
I think it's 37.
He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god. He shall magnify himself above all.
Yeah, exalt himself against, magnify above all, exalt himself against every. That sounds like it's an echo to me that Paul is using this Antiochus Epiphanes language about the man of lawlessness. So at this point in my research, I have a hunch. It doesn't mean my hunch is right, but I have a hunch this might have something to do with Titus. So now I'm going to do a history of interpretation. I've looked up the parallel passages. I did not know until we did this together, the John 17 one, but that's the exact phrase that's used, the son of perdition. That seems significant to me. That might be some kind of Jewish thing. Maybe it's a Jewish thing and a Roman thing, but I have a hunch that this is some kind of language about that temple destruction. And I want to see, am I the only one who's ever had that idea, or have other people had that idea? Because I really do believe that God is a powerful communicator, and if God is a powerful communicator, then it means that normal people should get it, which means if you have an idea, a hunch, probably somebody in the past should have had that same hunch too. So that's what I'm doing in my research, and so what I do, and I do this every time I do something like this, I make a document. I name it something that I'll be able to find it the next time I work on this. The shortest pencil is better than the longest memory. That's kind of the mantra. And like when I go back to my office, I'm going to rename this Man of Lawlessness, Parousia, Thessalonians, apostasy. I'm going to put everything in the title so that whenever I'm looking at that 10 years from now when I'm teaching this class again, and I can't even hardly remember my name, I can find my document, right? I want to put something in the, so that when I'm looking for, or maybe even partial preterism, I'm going to put as many things in that title so that when I go and ask my computer to go find it, it's going to find this. That's my file system. It's not ABCs. It's just 10,000 documents in my hard drive, and I go Control F, find, and that's how I find all my notes, because I'll never be able to remember it. I just put it in the thing, but I try to keep good notes. I was reading the other day about the word parousia, and I remembered I read this before, but this is a place in Josephus where Josephus uses the parousia of God to describe his coming to Mount Sinai. That seems significant to me. Could this talk about Jesus coming in judgment? Maybe so. Josephus uses the word parousia, and parousia means presence. A lot of people translate it coming. It actually means presence. Paul uses the word my presence and my apousia, my absence. So the alpha privative of this word's used of absence. So I put it there, and I put it in the beginning because next time I go down these rabbit trails, I want to go down that one. So I put it at the beginning. But I start putting ancient quotes. So this is the quote from Josephus that Caligula, or Gaius, about 41 had decreed that his statue must be erected in the Jewish temple and worshipped. He decreed that in 41 AD, and God killed him before he was able to bring that to fruition. But remember, if Paul's writing in 51, he already knows that the Roman emperor has tried to put an object of worship in the temple. That seems significant. That's not a quote from a commentary. It's the Ad Fontes quote here. Is what it says. Now, Caius Caesar did grossly abuse the fortune he arrived at as to take himself to be a god. Remember, this is somebody 2 decades before Titus. As to make himself to be a god and to desire to be called, so-called also, and to cut off those of greatest nobility out of the country. He also extended his impiety as far as the Jews. Accordingly, he sent Petronius with an army to Jerusalem. And remember, if you read, it took 18 minutes to read through 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Paul says the wrath of God has already started to come on the apostate people. Could he be talking about this? Accordingly, he sent Petronius with an army to Jerusalem to place his statutes in the temple and to command him that in case the Jews would not admit of them, he should slay those who opposed it and carry all the rest of the nation in captivity. Could this be what Paul's talking about, that the wrath has already come on apostate Judaism. And so I've got the quote and I've got the reference. Josephus, Jewish Wars, Book 2, Section 184 to 185. Ad fontes, baby. I want a T-shirt that says that. To the sources. Don't quote somebody says. Go find what the person actually said. Read it for yourself. Be a primary scholar. Josephus Wars 147 through 150. I just found this one day ago. On top of every one of these pageants was placed the commander of the city that was taken. This is talking about Titus's triumph in Rome. When he captured Jerusalem, he kept many people alive. And as he meandered his way back to Rome, he would come to a city and he would set up a theater and he would kill lots of Jews as an entertainment. He would invite people to feast and he would kill Jews in the most horrific way. When he got to Rome, he did that same thing but on a mega scale. And this is describing what Titus did. On top of every one of these pageants was placed the commander of the city that was taken and the manner where he was taken. Moreover, there followed those pageants a great number of ships and other spoils, and they carried in great plenty. But for those who were taken in the temple of Jerusalem, he made the greatest figure of all of them. That is the golden table, the weight of many talents, the lampstand also that was of gold, though its destruction was now changed from that we made use of. In other words, he changed the way it looked to disrespect it, I think. He made its middle shaft fixed upon the basis, and the small branches were produced out of it to a great length, having the likeness of a trident in their position. He had every one a socket made of brass for a lamp at the tops. These lamps in number were 7, representing the dignity of the number 7. And last of all the spoils, he carried the Torah. And so if you read Josephus, he took all the people in. The final person brought in was the high priest. The high priest was tortured all the way through Rome, and then when he was taken to the Colosseum, he was tortured supremely and then killed. And that was part of Titus's triumph. But it mentions, last of all, that the last thing he displayed was this Torah scroll. And I'm going to read something to you from the Babylonian Talmud that I had no idea was in the Babylonian Talmud, but someone referenced that Titus was mentioned in the Babylonian Talmud, and so ad fontes, I went and got the quote and read it and couldn't believe what it said. This is a passage from Josephus Wars, Book 6, 260, that says Titus went into the Holy of Holies. And remember, Josephus is Titus's friend. He's presenting kind of a whitewashed version of Titus, I think. But he says this, and now, since Caesar was in no way able to restrain the enthusiastic fury of the soldiers, and the fire proceeded on more and more, that is, when Titus and the army get to the temple, the outer rooms are already on fire. He went into the holy place of the temple. This is saying he went into the Holy of Holies. With his commanders, he saw it and what was in it, which he found to be far superior. Josephus is making very respectful to what the account of foreigners contained, and not inferior to it, to what we ourselves boasted of and believed about. So Josephus, who's Titus's friend, says Titus went into the Holy of Holies. And remember what our text says. He goes in not to the temple of God, but he goes into the naos of God, the inner temple of God. So Paul is saying the man of lawlessness will go into the Holy of Holies. Titus went into the Holy of Holies. Does this refer to the pig being sacrificed? I want to, I probably should do it this way. I want to track this down and see if it does refer to a pig sacrifice in the temple. It's the exact same thing Antiochus Epiphanes did. So this is Josephus Wars, Book 6, Section 316. And now the Romans, upon the flight of the seditious into the city, and upon the burning of the holy house itself, and of all the buildings round about it, brought their ensigns to the temple, set them over against the eastern gate, and did offer sacrifices to them. So I want to find out what kind of sacrifices Romans did elsewhere to their ensigns. And if it was a pig sacrifice, then I've got Titus doing exactly what Antiochus Epiphanes did. And recall that east of the temple is where the altar of burnt offering is. So this could be Titus sacrificing the pig on that altar, which would be exactly the same as Antiochus. Now, until 2 days ago, that's as far as my research had gone. But I started reading commentaries, and I forget which one pointed it out, but they pointed that there's a Jewish document that presents a completely different version of Titus in the temple. And the name of the document was the Leviticus Rabbah, chapter 2, section 3. And I've done enough primary source research to know that there's a thing called the Midrash Rabbah. I think our library has it in English. It has Jewish commentary on the whole Bible. And I thought, oh, it's telling me the Midrash Rabbah mentions Titus. And I happen to have my copy of the Midrash Rabbah at home, and so I went and read Leviticus 22:3, and it didn't have anything to do with Titus. And I thought, that's strange. And then I realized, and what I did is, just being a detective, I went to that great scholarly research tool, Google, and typed in Leviticus Rabbah 22:3, and it pulled up an English translation. And I realized that this wasn't the Midrash Rabbah that I had. It was a separate 5th century AD commentary on Leviticus. And so I went to the link, and it had the text in Hebrew, and then it had the text in translation. And this is what it says. And it's offensive. The wicked Titus entered the sanctum of the Holy of Holies, and with his sword brandished in his hand, he slashed the 2 curtains. And taking 2 whores, he spread out the scroll of the law beneath them and ravished them on the top of the altar. And with his sword came out full of blood, some say from the blood of Yom Kippur, sprinkled by the high priest on the curtains. He, Titus, began to revile and blaspheme, saying, "He who wages battle with a king in a desert and triumphs is different from him who rages battle in the king's own palace and vanquishes him." Josephus, Titus's buddy, makes Titus very respectful of the temple. Leviticus Rabbah paints a completely different picture. Now, the Leviticus Rabbah is written by Jews who hate Titus. Are they true? Or are they just making something up? And I don't know. I don't know if it's true or if it's making something up. But I do know that all parties admit that Titus went into the Holy of Holies. And I do know that they're referencing this Torah scroll, which is kind of, I'm enough of a detective to think, why does Josephus mention this Torah scroll as the last thing paraded through Rome? If Titus really did this, is he the one who proclaims himself against God, proclaiming himself to be God? If he said this, then absolutely what Paul's talking about is Titus. But I don't know. I mean, 5th century is 400 years later than Josephus. What did Titus do? He gathered all the temple vessels and put them in a sack and descended to a ship. Are you recalling Daniel say to this, or you're recalling Jesus say to this mountain, "Be taken up from here and thrown into the sea"? At sea, a wave rose up to drown him, and Titus said, "It would appear that this nation's God has power only on water. God only punished the generation of Enosh with water in the flood. Likewise, he can only punish the generation of the flood with water. The generation of the dispersal and Pharaoh and his army were only punished with water. So when I was in his house and domain, he had no power to stand against me. But now he opposes me here. The Holy One said, by your life I will punish you with the most insignificant of my creatures." Immediately, God hinted to the sea, and it stayed its anger. When he arrived in Rome, all the citizens came out and acclaimed him conqueror of the barbarians. Immediately they heated a bathhouse, and he entered and washed himself. When he came out, they poured for him the double glass for the bath, and God appointed a mosquito for him, and it entered his nose and gnawed its way up until it reached his brain. And he said, "Call for the doctors to split open the head of that man Titus, so I can know with what the God of the nations has punished him." Forthwith they summoned the doctors, and they split open his brain and found in it the likeness of a dove, and it weighed 2 liters. Rabbi Eleazar, son of Yoshi, said, "I was there, and they put the young bird on one side of the scales and 2 liters on the other, and they balanced one another. They took it, put it in a bowl, and as the mosquito withered, so Titus deteriorated. The mosquito flew away, and away flew the soul of wicked Titus." Section A describes Titus entering. Oh, this is a note. This is actually what hinted to me that there was a reference. And so I looked it up. Apparently, this is mentioned, a similar story, in a Jewish document called the Mekhilta, Titus. Guess where I'm going to go next on my rabbit trail? It's mentioned in Sifri, Deuteronomy. Guess where I'm going to go next? It's mentioned in Genesis, Rabbah. Guess where I'm going to go next? ad fontes. I want to see what Jewish people said about Titus going into the temple, and I found somebody who gives me the references. So what I have to do is just look them up. And that's what I'm going to do next time I get to study this. Well, I continued reading, and I thought, well, birds and brains, that sounds like made up stuff to me. I don't know. And if it's only one source, can I really trust it? But then I found a commentator who, are you guys with me? Do you understand what I'm doing? Just looking up, I just want to know what Jews say about Titus. I found a reference that the Babylonian Talmud mentions Titus sacking the temple. And I had an English copy of the Babylonian Talmud. So once I got the reference, I knew I could get it. So about an hour ago in my office, I turned to section 56b in the book called Gittim of the Babylonian Talmud. This is the main Jewish document that all Jews, even today, revere as holding true things about Judaism. This is what it says about Titus. He went and sent Titus, who said, "Where is their God, the rock with whom they trusted?" This is that wicked Titus who blasphemed and raged against heaven. What did he do? He took a whore by her hand, went into the house of the Holy of Holies, spread out the scroll of the Torah, and on it, and I edited the word because it was offensive. But the Babylonian Talmud is telling me the exact same thing that the Leviticus Rabbah said. The Leviticus Rabbah said it was 2 women. Babylonian Talmud says it's 1. Now I've got a Jewish tradition in multiple sources that says that Titus defiled the Holy of Holies. I'm starting to lean pretty heavily that this is what Paul's talking about in 2 Thessalonians. He took a sword and slashed the curtain. Leviticus Rabbah says the same thing. A miracle was done. Blood spurted out. Leviticus Rabbah says the same thing. He thought he had killed himself. Your adversaries have roared in the midst of your assembly, and they have set up their incense for signs. Abba Hanan says, who is the mighty one like you? Who is like you, having so thick a skin that you could hear the blaspheming and raging of that wicked man and keep dumb? The household of Rabbi Ishmael set forth a Tanaitic statement. Who is like you among the gods? Who is like you among the dumb? For the word for dumb and gods shares the same concept. I don't know what that's talking about. They must be spelled similarly. What did he do? He took the veil and made it into a kind of basket. That's exactly what the Leviticus Rabbah had said, and brought all the utensils that were in the sanctuary and put them in, and he put them in a boat to serve in triumph of the city. I have the arch of Titus that says that's true. And withal, I saw the wicked buried, and they had come to the grave, and they had done right away from the holy place and were forgotten in the city. Don't read the letters that spelled buried in that way, but rather as collected. I don't know what that's talking about. A gale arose. This is exactly what the Leviticus Rabbah said. Probably the Leviticus Rabbah is getting it from this, I imagine. Titus says, if he's so mighty, let him come up to dry land and make war with me there. And you can see this is a pretty different picture than Josephus paints of Titus. Is one true? I don't know. But I got the quotes. Ad fontes. Now I want to do something. This is an exercise. Before I got all those quotes, I was reading commentaries. So this is a Catholic commentary, 1953. Antiochus and his impious achievements did not correspond exactly to the description of the little horn. The death of Antiochus did not bring about either the end of the Syrian domination or the rise of a universal inviting kingdom. Considering the close resemblance of the man of lawlessness, or the Antichrist, described in 2 Thessalonians 2:3-12, and the little horn, we hold that the little horn in its little historical and obvious sense represents Antiochus, but in a fuller and adequate sense, it is the Antichrist, of whom Antiochus was a faint image. See J.B. Orchard, St. Paul, and Daniel. The fact must be stressed that Daniel's outlook extends much further than the Messianic age. So here's my question. How many references to Josephus was in that quote? How many references to John 17, 12 in that quote? How many references to the Babylonian Talmud in that quote? Or the Leviticus Rabbah? That guy's a secondary scholar. He's quoting other commentaries, but he didn't look it up for himself. So he's offering a view, and maybe it's the right view, but he doesn't have the ancient quotes. I'm probably not going to look at him again to help me, because I know he's just copying other commentaries. Hendrickson and Kistemacher, two guys who are in my tradition. I go to them all the time. I usually like what they have to say. This is what their commentary says. And they wrote it in 1953. I do this so I can put it in chronological order until I find a really good one, and then I'll put that one at the top. But 53 says it was Karen, and they quote a German source, who revived the old theory. Augustine was acquainted with it. So I'm kind of interested now. I wish they'd given me the quote of Augustine, because I would go get the Augustine quote, but Augustine was acquainted with it, that the man of lawlessness, Nero redivivus, Nero come back to life. He thought that the origin of the idea was the widespread superstitious fear in the early church that the monster of cruelty was about to reappear upon the scene. The Nero saga seems to have manifested itself in two forms. According to the first, the emperor did not really die in 68, but merely hid himself. According to the second, which became prevalent, especially after 88, he really was dead, but would rise again. No Josephus, no Babylonian Talmud. I like them, but I'm not going to go to them to get the sources because they didn't go themselves. Horton, and Horton is a guy similar tradition to me. I really like him. He writes, and this is 2012 work, Paul, writing most likely in the 50s, may have been prophesying any number of future Caesars, the reign of Nero or perhaps Titus. That's kind of good for me. I'm kind of leaning toward Titus. I want somebody to argue Titus because that's kind of how I'm leaning. He sacked Jerusalem in 70 AD, offering a pig on the altar. Now, I think where he's getting that is from Josephus, and I'm not sure Josephus is saying he offered a pig. It might be. I want to find out for myself, but reading Horton made my ears perk up, and want to try to find if that's true, and burned the temple to the ground with not one stone left upon the other, as Jesus prophesied on in Matthew 24:2. The Arch of Titus was built in Rome to commemorate the deified emperor's sacking of Jerusalem. Titus's brother, Domitian, when Titus died, Domitian declared that his brother was a god as part of the ceremonies. Although he, like Satan himself, is being restrained, the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. At the same time, the apostle seems to indicate that this satanic figure will be destroyed by Christ's return. Given the telescoping pattern of biblical prophecy, it does not seem unreasonable to conclude that this Antichrist figure, truly mimicking Christ, appears in two advents, two comings. First as a self-deifying Roman emperor, and then as a climactic figure at the end of the age, or perhaps more generally as world powers. In the meantime, such antichrists come and go on the world stage as echoes and foreshadowings. Now, I have to admit that this idea of telescoping, I've seen elsewhere in the Bible where you have two events. One is kind of a mini event, and then you have a major event. And so it could be that what's going on in Thessalonians is the mini event and the major event. So you've got a man of lawlessness coming who maybe is Titus, and then he's foreshadowing the ultimate Antichrist who's coming at the end of the age. If that's how it turns out to work, I don't have any problem. I can see how that's consistent with lots of other things. It seems to me that's why perhaps Jesus is taking the Antiochus Epiphanes passage of the abomination of desolations and using it of the destruction in 70 AD. So I have to admit, Horton's kind of piqued my interest. And because he's piqued my interest and he's told me some stuff that I didn't come across on my own, Horton is going to become one of my go-to guys now. And so this is what I'm going to do in my notes. And this is why you want to use these headings, because if you use the headings, you can move it up, and now immediately after my primary sources, the very first one that's going to come up now is Horton, because of all the ones I've read so far, Horton's the one that most convinces me. You with me what I did? So now I come to Vincent. And I read Vincent, and I thought to myself, I'm not a scholar. I don't even play one on TV. Vincent is a scholar. This is Vincent's quote, which I love. The man of sin, the son of perdition, the man of lawlessness, the son of perdition, see on the children of light. So he's got a comment there. The phrase man of sin does not occur elsewhere, either in the New Testament or the Septuagint. Son of perdition is found in John 17:12. So it's like, okay, I didn't know that. Children of perdition are found in Isaiah 57:4. We found that by looking up the cross references. The Son of Man has been thought to refer to Caligula, Titus, Simon Magus, Nero, the Pope of Rome, Luther, and Mohammed. And this is his footnote. maybe I don't. But he cites where he got all those things from. So the Eastern Orthodox Church believes the man of lawlessness is Islam, and so it's the Prophet Muhammad. The Reformed Church, persecuted by the Pope, thinks the Pope is the Antichrist. Some are thinking Caligula, who tried to set up his statue to be worshipped, is the man of lawlessness. We're leaning toward, or I'm leaning toward, Titus, but Simon Magus, the one, because I think Peter calls him, may you and your money go to perdition. It's probably that same word. That's probably when they're doing it. And then Nero, so it's like one guy, 3 sentences, the entire history of interpretation in one sentence. Okay, Vincent, you get promoted. And I'm going to put you above Horton because you're more concise and you've done the work. So then I come down here to the Jewish Encyclopedia. This is where I think I got that it's in the Babylonian Talmud. So I read their article. The Catholic Encyclopedia, I try to read people not just in my tradition, but in lots of traditions. Craig Kester, he does have the references, so I'm probably going to put him after Horton. Spence, I've got a long relationship with Spence. I really respect him. He quotes everybody. He gives exactly where the quote's from. I'm probably going to put him before Kester, but after Horton. Harold Honer. He's got the 2 Josephus quotes. I'm probably going to put him after Kester. And so now I've got a history of interpretation. Next time I go to this, as long as I can remember to save my work, shortest pencil is better than the longest memory. Next time I dive into this problem, I'm going to be way ahead of where I was. So do you see what I did? Now, I'm not expecting you to do what I did. I've been doing this for 40 years. But I do want you to kind of go down that path. Look up the cross-references. Any kind of ancient thing, see if you can get the actual quote. Look at the context of the cross-references and keep going back to your difficult passage and say, does any of this throw light on my problem? For me, a week ago, I didn't know. This one was kind of giving me trouble as a partial preterist, but now I don't know. I mean, yeah, there's some things that don't quite fit, but a lot of things that do fit. So I'm going to keep going down those rabbit trails and see where it takes me. Okay, so we've got 11 minutes left. And so what I want to do is, we've done enough of these now, and thank you for signing up for presentations. But I wanted just to hear from you about where you are in your research, if you decided what you've researched, and maybe just talk about some of those things. And Noah, would you like to just tell us where your research is, kind of what questions or what question you're kind of wanting to tackle?
Yeah, so in Philippians 2, mainly 6 through 8, but it's the
what it means when it says Jesus emptied himself.
And he wasn't was it his divinity? Was it was it a sign of humility where he just didn't empty himself necessarily of divinity, but took the form of a slave and died on the cross in our time?
And so what are you going to do? Like, what is your strategy for tackling that difficult passage?
Well, first, do the cross references.
Look up all the cross references, every possible cross reference to that. And the main one is that whole Colossians 2:8 and 9. In him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form. And so, like, what does that passage mean? What does this passage mean? Does this passage not mean that, like, omnipotence, omnipresence doesn't mean that? How do these passages go together? Look up all the cross references, and then you're going to start doing a history of interpretation. And I encourage you to do it like I did. Start collecting the ones that you find convincing. Put those first. Be ad fontes. You know, if somebody says Augustine says this, go see what Augustine said. And I think you're going to be well on your way. You've got 25 minutes to wow us, and so that's going to be great. And then you can supplement that with modern journals, modern systematic theologies. How did Athanasius deal with that passage? So that's good. Who else? I see some of you have decided what you're doing. Jessica, what is 1 Corinthians 11:7? What does that passage say?
Well, it's in the context of discussing head coverings in the church. And so that specific verse says that man should not wear a head covering because he was made in the image of the glory of God, but women should because they were made in the image of the glory of man.
Well, and it even omits the word image. Doesn't it say? And it's like, Paul, like, what in the world are you saying? What are going to be the cross references you're going to look up there?
To be honest, I haven't necessarily started on this project, but immediately what comes to mind is Genesis saying man and
Genesis, which says the man and the woman are clearly the image of God. In the image of God made he him, male and female made he them. So what exactly is Paul saying? And that sounds really offensive to me against women. And you probably know me, I'm a complementarian. But I believe in the kind of complementarian theology that when a young lady hears it, she is so glad that she is a woman and not a man, and it's like just glories in the fact that she's a woman. So if that's true, how in the world does this passage fit in with that? And I am just so convinced that it does fit in with it. Like when you step back and do a whole Bible biblical theology, I would make sure you do all the cross references. Bring in, and of course, one of the ideas that you always want to do is how does it relate to the Garden of Eden and how does it relate to the eschaton? And in the eschaton, you do have the new Adam and you have the new Eve, and like talk about her position in the eschatological consummation. And then this whole idea that Dawkins tries to hawk in saying that the Bible is somehow anti-woman. I think that's a very tough sell when you look at women's position in the eschatological consummation. But those are the passages you want to look up all the cross references. You want to look at how's it related to Eden and how is it related to eschatological consummation. I think you're going to get to a place where that passage is going to go from being like a problem to a glory. That's my hunch. But anyone else? Does anyone else know what you want to tackle, or have any idea what you want to tackle? Are you familiar with VeggieTales? I'm Bob the Tomato. I'm here to help. My name's Judd. I'm here to help. Let me help. What are you guys thinking of? Oh, Audrey, I see you're tackling the whole predestination. And is it a particular verse, or is it just the whole predestination idea?
Looking specifically at Romans 9, kind of the whole chapter.
It has that Jacob I've loved, Esau I've hated. You've got all those Old Testament passages. God, I have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I have compassion. And the way that one, for me, the cross references really, really, really helped. I just started reading the cross references. And then you probably want to get help from like people who have really worked through that issue. On the kind of sovereign grace side, Piper's really good. He has 4 sermons in a series. I think it's called Unconditional Election or something. And of all the people I've ever heard make a case for that, he does a better job. Gospel Coalition does a really good job. If you want to hear from the other side, Norm Geisler has on YouTube like 5 hours of lectures why Romans 9 doesn't mean what it appears to mean, and he goes through all the arguments. You might want to look at Augustine too. He really wrestled with that, and he actually changed his view. So there are a lot of resources there. But in the midst of it, don't get depressed at all. Eventually, you'll come out at a great place, but that is a hard chapter. I remember the first time I read it in Greek, I thought, this can't be saying what it seems to say. So that's going to be good. I'm going to look forward to that. Some of the rest. Have you decided what you're going to? Has anybody decided what they're going to do yet? Carlos, what are you going to do?
I've never seen the sign-up sheet.
Yeah, it's in the Google Drive. In that I shared that link that I shared with you.
I just missed it.
Oh,
I have no idea.
I will give you the link. I think the link is in Brightspace too, but if you email me, I'll give you the link. And you can sign up. Do you know what you would like to do?
I'm being given the passage where the Sadducees asked Jesus about the 7 husbands, the one wife.
Oh, that's a great one. Now, there were 7 husbands, and finally the woman died. In the resurrection, of course, they didn't believe in the resurrection. Whose wife will she be? That's a great passage. The cross references are going to take you into the Levirate law, the whole Judah and his Canaanite daughter-in-law passage. That's going to take you everywhere. But eventually, particularly if you ask the question in Eden and the eschaton, I think it's going to take you to a really good place. So that's a great passage. Anybody else know what they're going to do? We'll do this more more on Tuesday. So maybe if you don't have your topic yet, maybe you can think about that and we can kind of brainstorm together. Hope you have a great weekend. I'll see you next Tuesday.